Hello, welcome back to my channel. It is time to do, I think, everybody's favorite bookish videos, top reads of the year. I'm going to do this in two videos. I've got my top fiction reads of the year, and then I'm going to have my top nonfiction reads of the year. So I'm going to talk about like my top three, sorry, not top three. I'm going to talk about my top 10 books / series. I'll get into it. And then I'm gonna have I have a couple of honorable mentions. So these are like not in any strict order, but you know, maybe the first 6 or so are the ones that I thought of off the top of my head. And then like the rest of them were like, I just would scroll through what books did I read this year and then be like, oh yeah, that one. Yep, that one. The first one I want to talk about is The Space Between Worlds. This is a standalone science fiction about a young woman who works for this company as somebody who is able to hop between parallel dimensions because her other selves has died in most of these other worlds. And then she kind of starts to discover like that there's something weird about that fact about her. And there's just a lot in here about class and science, class and capitalism, and also like I love our main character. She is like this very unapologetic survivor. She is somebody who she doesn't really worry about the ethics of what it takes for her to survive. And it's not just that like she's like this morally gray asshole. It's just that like she's just like the embodiment of like the human instinct to survive, and how like at some point ethics isn't really a part of that conversation anymore, especially like when especially when you're fighting against factors that are outside of your control. Anyway, that one I read like towards the beginning of the year, and it has just stuck with me. So of course that one had to be on this list. You know, the next book that lives rent-free in my head is Gone with the Wind. Which is interesting because like I have a hard time saying that I love it because it's such like a problematic book. You know, if we're just gonna like do like, you know, it fills a lot of the criteria for like a problematic, recent, dated kind of story, but I don't want to say but because I don't want to like diminish like what is like challenging about this book. So okay, we won't say but, we will say so. It makes it onto this list because the writing fucking blew me away. I was very impressed and enthralled by how the author took the historical events of the American South during and after the Civil War, and then also paralleled it thematically in the development of our central characters. I'm not usually somebody who really picks up on, like, I'm not somebody who reads a lot of fiction with like a heavy critical, you know, literature professor kind of analysis. I found the themes that were represented metaphorically in this book easy to catch on to, and very interesting and very engaging. And I mentioned like when I first talked about this book, like this is a book that I would love to actually see studied in school. It's not gonna be because it's over 1,000 pages long. But I think it made me think about our country and our history, and our relationship to some of the unpleasant parts of our history. It made me think about it in like a very juicy, invigorating way. So I appreciate it for that, and I absolutely recognize that this is going to be a book that a lot of people just say fuck no to, or a lot of people are like, I don't know, there's just so much, like, I mean, frequent use of the N-word, especially by white characters. Author is a white woman. It's also written in the 30s, and the author is dead and not able to like further whatever conversation was initiated in this book. Like there's some conversations to be had about when is it appropriate to engage with problematic material. I don't know. I feel like that's too complex a conversation for me to responsibly handle by myself, but it is a conversation that I am interested in, and I like listening to other people discuss that. So anyway, also like the narrator for the audiobook I listened to was fantastic and absolutely made this experience. I love finding other people who actually have read this full book and like being able to talk to them about like that experience. So the next book on this list is probably my most recent read on this list, and that is The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. I'm not a big thriller reader. I'm not a big like criminal forensic reader. But like this is like a cultural icon of the genre, both like in literature and film, I believe, and I absolutely understand the hype. I just finished filming my December wrap-up, and I talk about this book in much more detail there. I will be sure to link that in the description box below. Its story has definitely left its mark on current pop culture, and I think it has left an impact for good reason. So, yep. Then I've got a series. I've got the Broken Earth trilogy. I reread the 5th season, and then finished off the series. I think if I was going to have to pick my favorite from this year, it would be book 2, The Obelisk Gate, because we get the perspective of Essun's daughter Nasun, and her father who murdered her brother for being an Origine, and Nasun herself is an Origine, and just like the depiction of Nasun's very traumatic love for her father, because she loves him so much, and she's also like afraid of him, and she is angry at him, and she's only 8 years old, and it's such a but like she also sees he loves her and he's afraid of her and he wants to protect her, and he is very prejudiced against like who she is, and he is racked by the grief of killing his son and the way that informs his protectiveness and fear of his daughter. Like it's such, and all of this is happening while the world is fucking falling apart around them, and it is such an emotionally fraught, complex, fascinating relationship. And that is something that is true of all 3 of these books, is like there are these characters that have these very strange symbiotic relationships that are like so necessary but unhealthy and scary, but also like loving and trusting, and it's just, it makes my brain sizzle like delicious bacon. What a weird metaphor. I don't know where that came from. I'm sorry. But anyway, yes. I look forward to reading more work from N.K. Jemisin. The hype is well deserved. Alright, the next book on here is a romance. I had to put The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics on here just because of like the emotional roller coaster that was reading this book. Because yes, there is so much joy in these women discovering their affection for each other, and joy their joy in celebrating each other's work and supporting each other, and also like the broader story of the fact that like queer women and queer relationships have always existed and have always found their safe space, even in the face of, you know, society that would want to erase that. But then also just like the frustration and rage of the sexism that these women experience, of being women in science, of like the you know, discrimination towards the arts that are not seen as fine arts because they are women's craft, and just the complexity of emotions, like the spectrum of emotions that I felt while reading this book left its mark. I just think about it. I think about, you know, I think about my experience of reading this book a lot. So this, you know, I was just thinking about like what books have left an impression on me, and like, yes, this one did. So great. Women in science, characters involved in very talented handicrafts. Gotta love it. Ooh, okay, next up we've got another women in science. We've got Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Jassy. Transcendent Kingdom is about a woman who is a scientist who is studying the brain's reward-seeking response in the context of drug addiction. And her personal connection to that is her brother got addicted to opioids and passed away. And then it's also the story of her family being immigrants to this country, and like that added layer of challenges around like what happened to her brother, and then also like the role of religion, because like her mother was very her mother was like a very devoutly pious woman, but then, you know, they went through this great grief and trauma with losing her brother, and there's a lot of like, you know, what happened with her relationship with her faith during that time, and also her mother's relationship with her faith at that time, and then also like where her faith and her science kind of butt heads. And it does this thing that I love about conversations of religion and science, where it acknowledges that both of these things are in pursuit of the same goal, which is to understand our world and understand our place in it. And recognizing that both of them have their both of them will have their points when they don't have the answers. You know, religion pretends to have all of the answers, but especially when you go through something very traumatic or very grief-stricken, it can feel like, you know, you'll have the question of like, why did this need to happen? And the answers that your faith gives you can be very unsatisfying. And then science can also, you know, science can give you a lot of answers, but sometimes, especially when it comes to like emotions or things like we don't understand yet about human psychology, things we don't understand about the concept of faith, things we don't understand about the concept of like miracles or coincidence, and science just isn't quite there yet. I think it is a very beautifully written, complex story, but it also hinges around the specific conversation that I am specifically fascinated by. So next we've got absolutely my favorite audiobook of the year, and that is Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. The story itself, of course, is also fascinating, but there is something about Angie Thomas's writing that lends itself perfectly to being a verbally told story. Last year, I listened to the audiobook of The Hate You Give and had a very similar reaction. So Concrete Rose follows Star's father from The Hate You Give when he's 17 and becomes a teen father. Twice. And it just kind of follows this, you know, this black kid who has to grow up really fast and he does not come from a privileged background. You know, his mother is a single mother, and it's just this beautiful, frustrating, complex, full of care story. In terms of like, you see how the author really cares about the complexity of the scenario that she is depicting. The way the way that the author is very crafted with love and crafted with attention to detail. This kind of slice of life story that is going to resonate with a lot of people. And there are just times where like you want to both take our main character and shake some sense into him, but also like hug him and tell him like, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna suck the whole time. You don't have to pretend that it doesn't suck. But you are also strong enough to handle this, and it's going to be okay. Like, and I really loved the, like, his mother's relationship to him, because like there are times where I was almost feeling like her tough love was like almost too tough, but I also see that it is the strategy where a Maverick's life is not going to be easy as he takes responsibility for his mistakes. Like, it's not going to be easy, and no one's going to do him any favors by giving him a break. But also, like, no one around him is going to let him fail. But he kind of needs to know how far can he actually go. He needs to, run until he actually collapses to see, hey, you were able to run a lot farther than you thought you would. And when you collapsed, there were people there to help you. And yeah, like the story of community and the story of like, what does it mean to start a family in this kind of unintentional, unconventional way? And of course, like the narration is just fantastic. Just Angie Thomas crafts a great story. Hard stories, complex stories, but also just like masterfully crafted stories. Next book, that is one of the top books of the year, Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. I read this in a day. I didn't mean to. This is another book kind of like Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, where like I just ran through this whole gambit of emotions, just like hope and grief, and I love what's happening, and I'm scared for the characters, and are things going to be okay? And I felt like that was really striking to feel all that in like a YA romance. Also, this is like a YA romance that feels very age appropriate. I'm someone who is very drawn to like very steamy romances and like dark romances, which are not appropriate kind of plot points for teenagers. But I felt like the relationship in this was very age appropriate, because it's kind of like, it kind of explores what is so special about your first love, your first crush, your first like crush that like likes you back, and just like discovering how an emotionally intimate relationship can be fulfilling in a different way from a platonic relationship. But also like really valuing the platonic and familial relationships that our main character has. And then of course, just like the imagery and magic in this book is lovely and affirming, and we'll love to see it. So I'm kind of surprised that I haven't reread this already. There's so many books. Okay, next up we have another series, and that would be the Daevabad trilogy. I've only got City of Brass and Kingdom of Copper. My dad still has my copy of Empire of Gold. But yeah, this I had read. Had I read City of Brass last year? I don't remember. well, I reread this and then got into reading Kingdom of Copper, and then finished up with Empire of Gold. Yeah, and then finished up with Empire of Gold. And it was just like a great ride of a story. And I think I talked about this in one of my other wrap-ups, but I love that even with my very limited knowledge of the epic history of like the Middle East and India, I can tell that this story draws a lot of inspiration from historical events, but is not like a shot for shot replica of historical events. It's just, you can just see the wealth of inspiration of the culture and the cultural tensions and the dilemma of such a long history of cultural tensions. I liked the overarching like ethical conundrum theme of like when a region or a people have so much fraught history, like how difficult it can be to just say enough and just say, I know I want revenge. I know that you have hurt me. I know that we don't trust each other, but I'm gonna choose peace. And just like how immensely difficult it is to not just get to that place personally, but how do you impart that on entire cultures? And how can you convince people that it's enough? And the unresolved is actually best left unresolved because the cost of revenge is too high. Anyway, lovely and complex and has so much reread value. So lovely. Okay, and the book in my number 10 slot is The Burning God, which is the third book in the Poppy War series, which I think when I did this list last year, the Poppy War was an honorable mention because like while it didn't make it into like my top 10 books of the year, I could definitely tell it was one of the best written books I had read that year. But like my feelings were just like, it's good. It's absolutely fucking good. It just didn't like hit me. And I think part of it is like, it's a very military focused fantasy. And I always felt myself wanting more of the fantasy side, but that's just not really the story it was telling. But The Burning God makes it onto this list because it took me till book 3 to realize that this is a villain origin story. This trilogy is a villain origin story. And because it's not overtly presented that way, like you think that Rin is going to be, you know, this underdog, and it's just like a dark fantasy where characters have to be morally gray because they're dealing with these very complex decisions. Like I thought it was kind of like, yeah, she's the hero, you root for her, but it's also supposed to be really hard to root for her. But then I kind of realized that like, no, she's a villain in a way. And it was just like, as soon as I had that shift in perspective and the way that like seeing the way that somebody who means well just devolves into not being able to escape the cycle of like causing harm and seeking revenge. It was fascinating, and it was like, and I don't know what it was, but like, yeah, as soon as I had the word villain in my perspective, it just made everything like 10 times more fascinating. I don't know what that says about me. Let's not get into it too deep, but yeah, anyway. Okay, let's wrap this up with my honorable mentions because my voice is tired. Okay, so my honorable mentions are Amari and the Night Brothers, which is a middle grade about a young black girl who, in the pursuit of trying to figure out what happens to her brother, discovers that she has this magical heritage and goes to this magical school. And it is a middle grade, so it manages to engage with like these complex issues about like racism and classism and like the way those two things specifically intersect. But because it's a middle grade, it does it in a way that's like not super emotionally draining. And yeah, it was a fun time, and I look forward to, I think book 2 is going to come out sometime this year, and I look forward to this series, and I wish the series much success. And then the other honorable mention is The Intimacy Experiment, which is another romance. It's actually like the second book in, it's kind of a series. I mean, it's a romance in the way where like it can be read as a standalone, but it's following characters from the first book, The Roommate, which I haven't read. But I really enjoyed The Intimacy Experiment because I really enjoyed the way it talked about religion and faith, and just doing it in a way that like isn't evangelizing, but just kind of talking about how your cultural faith can be a wealth of knowledge for you to draw on when you are dealing with grief, when you are dealing with upheaval, and the way that it can be very comforting, and it can be a way to guide you when, you know, science fails you, or when, you know, pure logic just fails you. You can see there's a theme. I really like books that understand the difference between faith and organized religion, and really explore like the way, like why does faith and religion still have such impact in our society to this day, and just like exploring the complexities of a person's like personal relationship with it. And then also, like, this book was like less steamy than I was expecting, but I did feel like the steaminess that we got was rewarding, was appropriate. Like I kind of appreciated the slow burn. I totally understand people's criticisms were like, you would think that these people would be better at communication with each other, but that's also kind of the point, because like our female lead, she's dealing with learning the distinction between physical intimacy and emotional intimacy, and how they're very different. And, you know, experience in one doesn't necessarily translate to experience in the other. And I also really appreciated like that conversation as well. So those are my top fiction reads of 2021. Let me know if any of these also made it into your top reads of the year, or if they are on your 2022 TBR. I will have my social media and other places where you can find me in the description box below. I encourage you to go out into the world and be curious, and I will catch you folks in my next video. Bye!